Well, thanks for sticking with us here before lunch. Monte Shaw again with IRFA, and I have the distinct pleasure of being joined up here with some folks who are going to give you some insights and all those outstanding issues that I whipped through for 2019. They have all of the answers, and they personally promised me that all of them are 100% correct. So we're going to start here, first of all, on my immediate left, with Eric Branstad. Eric is the Managing Director of the Mercury Public Affairs Office here in Des Moines. Prior to that, he served as a Senior White House Advisor at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and he was the Chief Aide there to Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. I actually got to know Eric, well, for the first time in 2012 when we worked on an Iowa caucus project together, and he did that again in 2016. Next to Eric is Kevin Studer. Kevin serves as the Federal Policy Advisor for Iowa Corn, and prior to Iowa Corn, he worked for over 11 years at USDA, and served over 10 years as a congressional staffer, including a stint as Ag Counsel for Senator Chuck Grassley. But I think the pinnacle of Kevin's career was undoubtedly that one time he was named the USDA Federal Government Employee of the Year. So I don't know what that takes, but man, right there, Kevin Studer. Next to him, we have a sub-in. It's your program and maybe the guide said Devin Mogler of Green Plains. Devin was unable to get out of Washington, D.C. He had an important event last night he had to be at, and they canceled about 3 different flights on him today. So we're very happy that Robert White has agreed to step in and fill in as one of our experts. He is the VP of Industry Relations for the Renewable Fuels Association, not to be confused with Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. You've been there about 10 years. I think you've been in the industry 18. And Robert likes to say that he's responsible for half of the E85 sales in America. But I've told him you don't drive that much, so I don't think so. And then lastly, we have on the far side, we have Donnell with MBB, who you just heard from, and so you've heard his bio. So I'm going to put this piece of paper away. And I'm just going to go literally to my PowerPoint slides where we threw this out. We're going to, in the interest of time, we're not going to ask them their favorite Super Bowl team or anything like that. We're just going to jump into it. We heard Acting Administrator Wheeler say during congressional testimony here recently that that the RVP year-round E15 regulation will be. Kevin, your mic might not be turned on. Do you have a green light?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, it's not him. So we should be in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's all this stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and I had to use all of my fingers. So he said, by golly, it'll be done by June 1st unless the government shutdown goes on for a while. The government shutdown ended 2 days later, so anybody can jump in, but will we see the EPA finalize a year-round E15 rule by June 1st? Kevin, do you want to go first?
Well, the optimistic part of me says absolutely. The cynical part of me says, with the oil industry, as you know, never gives up a good fight, and I think behind the scenes they'll be working to delay that as much as they can. But I do know, I was in Washington a couple weeks ago, and I'm not based out of Washington, so I just happened to be there a couple weeks ago. The rumor kind of out there is that Andrew Wheeler wants to just get this done. He's just kind of tired of going to the Hill. He knows it's important to Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley, and obviously Senator Grassley has a whole new role as chairman of the Finance Committee that is going to be hugely important for the White House in 2020, I think, with trade and delivering on all these trade issues, and Senator Grassley will be instrumental in that, and I think they want to keep the chairman happy, and I think we will see that rule by June.
Okay. Eric, you served in the White House and in the administration. Obviously, the president came to Iowa, said this will be done. Is that going to happen?
We're very fortunate to have a president, promises made, promises delivered. I also believe that that's going to be done because when the president says something, he expects it to be done, and it will be done.
Okay. Robert, you want to weigh in?
Well, I try to be optimistic, but we're looking at a timeline that's getting extremely tight. EPA has said that they're would plan to get down to a 45-day comment period, a 45-day final rulemaking process. That already puts us into May, and all proposals have to start at OMB, and it's not there yet. What the RFA did last week was ask EPA to bifurcate the rulemaking process, separate the RIN reform from the E15 RVP fix so that this process could begin. Because EPA has admitted they don't know what they're going to do on RIN reform yet, and it's holding E15 hostage. So we just think the agency's got a tool they could use, separate the two into two different rulemaking processes, one that doesn't need done by June 1st, the other one definitely needs done by June 1st, and they could get this done, but jury's out.
Yeah, I think if the government doesn't shut down again, they do have the ability to get this done by June 1. I think the odds would go up exponentially if they did what RFA asked and what several of us have asked, which is to not do the RIN reform part of it. Do you guys think that RIN reform and E15 will stay together or separate? You can just give me a one-word answer if you want. In other words, will it be one rule that does year-round E15 and the RIN reforms like the EPA had originally said, or will they be forced by the timeline to split those apart?
I'm going to say separate.
Okay.
I'm going to say if they split it, I think we'll see it faster.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll just do a few more on these, and then we'll get you in here in a second, Donnell. So we talked about the RINs. We still think June 1st is a possibility if they can get this going. The oil companies have said, the second the ink dries on the administrator's signature, they'll be filing in court. So maybe just briefly, what do you think the odds are that the oil companies will get a temporary restraining order while a court case goes? I think we all agree that there will be lawyers, right? Okay, so there will be lawyers. That's one promise up here that I think we can guarantee you. But with those lawyers, will they get a restraining order while the court case goes? And then will we ultimately win or lose the case? What's your crystal ball prediction now based on what do we think is going to happen? Anybody want to jump into that for you three?
I think the legality of it will be solely in the rulemaking itself. If the authority that EPA uses to grant that waiver is broad, then it's a lot less challengeable for a oil favorable judge to stop. But if EPA keeps it narrow, I think it's almost guaranteed that it's challenged. I mean, API and AFPM have both publicly stated that they will challenge it. And I think ultimately we win, but can they stop it from happening this summer? My crystal ball is still foggy on that one.
You have a foggy crystal ball. Kevin, how's your crystal ball?
My crystal ball is, I just don't think a judge would want to look at this and say, is there irreparable harm here to the industry? I just don't think if I'm an industry attorney going in and saying, oh, this could do this or this could do that, and I know I could have tons of data, and I never want to underestimate the oil industry's legal team, but I think it would be pretty tough. But also the cynical part of me is I never want to be an odds maker when it comes to a decision by a federal judge, because obviously I'm sitting here, so I tried practicing law, and obviously you can see how that turned out for me. Judging on what a judge wants to do is, I thought I was going to go in the courthouse and it was going to go like this, and then I walked out and it was 180. So you just don't know.
Yeah. Eric, any thoughts on that from the White House? They feel good about upholding this?
They feel good. I mean, the president's words are strong, and they're going to listen to that. And I think we absolutely win at the end of the day.
I think to Kevin's point, the irreparable harm, it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's not a mandate. It's not a forcing the oil companies to do anything, actually.
Exactly.
So I think that bodes well for us.
They've actually gone out on their earnings calls when the president made this announcement in Council Bluffs, and then they had earnings calls, and the oil companies were asked, well, the president made this big announcement. Is this going to hurt your long-term profitability as oil use goes down? And every one of them went on the record. Remember, they're not, in theory, supposed to lie to their investors under the Securities and Exchange Act. And they all said, no, it takes too long. It won't be a big deal. So then their lawyers will turn around in this and try to say, oh, it's going to kill us in 6 months if we don't get a restraining order. So the cynical part of me will enjoy watching them do that pretzel, but the oil companies, that's not a problem for them. They've crossed that. Donnell, switching to trade for a little bit, we are going to have a trade panel later, but I wanted to get your input on this. I think farmers were very reluctant to go to the U.S. government and say, hey, Argentina is dumping, we need to stop this. Even though it was obvious and had been happening for years, we're usually on the recipient of those complaints when they're not true. Here was a true one, but finally it was so egregious that your industry went and said, hey, commerce, we've got to stop this, and it happened. But now, maybe it's going to be in reverse. So I'd like to get your input on where I know you probably touched on it with your last one, but is there anything else that you want to add? Because I want to bring Eric into it. He didn't have a chance to hear you, so.
Yeah, so that was a huge effort for our industry, and you're exactly right that we had to sit back and really watch as our market share was being reduced year on year on year before that case became ripe enough to bring it up. And so then another whole year goes along as that case makes its way through. So as I mentioned, the duties were very substantial. So that to me says that the courts found that exactly what we were saying was true. There was a huge amount of harm being done to the domestic industry, and the playing field was very far from being level. And so those duties were applied. They're in place today. I mentioned that there are appeals underway by Argentina and Indonesia. Those duties remain in place through those appeals, so our industry can continue to do well. Probably more concerned about the changed circumstances review and how that's going to play out, because obviously the courts aren't as involved in that as the politics are involved in that. So we will continue to watch that and see where that goes, here probably in the first half of 2019.
So Eric, I may have the timing off on this, but I'm going to make it sound good for you, so don't disagree with me. When you were at Commerce, we got this decision that was favorable. Well, it was both, first of all, it was favorable for biodiesel, U.S. biodiesel, but it was accurate. It was just indisputable. It was one of the most plain cases of dumping that you've ever seen in the history of the world. Now you've left, and now it's all going back. It's potentially going backwards. So, from talking to your former colleagues there, if you're allowed to, do you have any insight on what triggered this? Are they serious about seeing it through, and what do you think might ultimately happen?
Well, first of all, when I was at Commerce, I worked very closely with this team. This team is very serious. They're very thorough, and when they made this decision, it was with a lot of thought, and it was done just right to make sure that the numbers worked out. They studied these things. They watched these things. I think they're going to stand strong. They see what wrong has been done and who has been affected, and they're going to keep that fix. With the numbers still being there, I'm confident that we'll see a strong decision.
So they're looking at it, but you think that they'll stand by the original decision?
Yes.
Well, we hope so. As I said in my opening remarks, I'd really hate to see the Trump Commerce Department snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, because we really did see a record production here in Iowa of biodiesel, and it's basically, we finally had a level playing field. We have a level playing field. We can compete. Switch and trade a little bit to China. There seems to be some smoke out there that maybe there's some actual progress being made to resolve this. When we'll hear more about this from our trade panel, so I won't go into it a whole lot after lunch. But we were just in China. I personally think that the amount of ethanol they might want to import from us in the near term has a B in front of the gallons, not an M. So it's a big deal. With things are hurting. We'll start with Eric and then maybe go down to our ethanol folks. I kind of was cynical. I thought that we probably wouldn't get to Trump and China coming together until maybe the election year, and it'd be another year. But do you think 2019 is the year where we get the trade with China back on track and on a better footing, or what do you see?
Well, it certainly was, to all of us, a very painful 2018. I think both countries have realized and have come together, and what makes me feel good is a lot of the friends, some of the trade team that I used to work with when I was part of the president's trip to China back in November 2017. A lot of those same trade pros were just in China. This was about 3 weeks ago, and they had these are the these are the real workers and the real folks working with their Chinese counterparts and really going through issue by issue and piece by piece to take back to their principles something monumental and something both sides can work with and both sides can agree to at the end of the day with the principles deciding what works. That meeting, that 2-day meeting turned into a 3-day meeting, and there are folks from both sides came back to their principles, and we're now starting to hear, and there's leaks, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves and I don't want to get too excited, but when we start hearing about China, one of the most that the president said certainly during the campaign and has said really every day since is that, and one of his number one goals is shrinking the trade deficit. And when we start hearing leaks like over a 6-year period, reducing the trade deficit to zero, which is $1.2 trillion, when we start seeing those kinds of numbers, what we're seeing is, fortunately, we live in an ag state, and the needs of ethanol and corn and soybeans and pork and beef and everything else that we produce are big needs to China. Yeah. And so when we're talking about shrinking that trade deficit, we are at the top of the list and one of those most valuable pieces. And we all need to work really hard to make sure that we, especially renewable fuels, are at the top of that list.
Speaking of that list, Kevin, it seems like there has been some rumors that, before like the big, tied up with the red ribbon announcements made, that there may be some incremental goodwill steps on both sides. That could include ag products going from the U.S. to China. We've been trying to get ethanol on that list along with soybeans and some other things. Have you heard anything on that, or what's your take on what will happen with China in 2019?
Well, I can tell you from an Iowa corn perspective that we can't wait. We have to get this done. It's important to my growers. It's important to the state, as Eric said, as an agriculture state. There's no waiting. Our farmers need it. We could get this turned around. You could maybe, I'm not an economist on this, but you could put 20, 30, 40 cents on the price of corn right now, which would be a huge win for us. And let alone our soybean. Our corn farmers at Iowa Corn, half of them plant soybeans. This would be a huge win for them. If you turn this around, you might put $1, $2 on beans. Yeah. That's a big deal, especially this year when we averaged 220 bushels on corn, 60, 70, 80 bushels on soybeans. Do the math. That's a big number, and we need it. We need it done now.
Robert, do you have any insights on that?
No different opinion. Obviously the recent news that Eric was talking about is promising. The ethanol industry is right hitched with ag, obviously. We need some relief as well. Ethanol plants are operating in a dangerous, or lack of margin, is probably a better way to put it. And China not only wants, but needs us. And eventually something's going to give. Just hopefully it's today, not tomorrow.
So I was having a very interesting discussion with some farmers yesterday. I won't say who and put them on the spot, but it was about how should we view President Trump? Is he a friend? Is he a foe? Is he in between? And obviously we talked about the year-round E15 and that's a great win. But we have had some of these trade issues. And then, he did appoint a guy named Scott Pruitt, who, as I mentioned this morning, I love referring to as the former EPA administrator. And these little things called small refinery exemptions. Donnell, a lot of that focus was on ethanol, but it exempted everything, including biodiesel. So we now have a whole bunch of them sitting there for 2018 with the new guy, Mr. Wheeler, sitting there. What do you foresee happening going forward?
Well, I would expect there to be a little more hesitancy. We've all referred to those small refinery exemptions being handed out like Halloween candy, and I think the backlash on Administrator Pruitt for that, our industries have been very strong in our response to that. So our champions know how impactful that is to us. And so I think, what we'll see moving forward, I don't think there'll be any less applications for those. I'm hopeful that there'll be a little more scrutiny put to the appropriateness of those before those are actually granted.
Okay. Robert, how do you think, I mean, obviously we don't know until he takes an action, but what do you think is maybe the most likely scenario for how SREs will be handled under Wheeler's EPA as opposed to Pruitt's EPA?
Well, I think not only has the administrator changed, but the climate overall has changed. I mean, we don't have 80-cent RINs anymore. We have 22, 23-cent RINs. The hardship case is even more difficult to prove now than it was a year ago, or basically a year ago today. I also think there'll be less, but I don't think they're going to stop existing. But I really do think my biodiesel colleague is right. I think the applications will continue. You'd be
Stupid.
Yeah,
That's the word you're looking for.
I was trying not to say stupid, but you would be ignoring your investors' wherewithal if you didn't apply for a small refinery exemption if you owned and operated an oil company. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I do think that we have better odds on a more judicious outcome with Wheeler. And of course, we have a lot of lawsuits on this very subject. And the outcome of the 10th Circuit case that we have filed against CVR and Holly Frontier will be a tell-all. Do those gallons have to be put back into circulation? Do they have to, over 2.25 billion gallons on the small refinery exemptions? But you also have 500 million gallons from Philadelphia Energy Solutions that the court has told EPA to put into play. So yeah, I agree and think I don't know how bright the future is, but it's going to be better than it was than under Pruitt.
Eric, and if this is outside your wheelhouse, just let me know, but because you were more on the trade and other side, but do you have any insights from your former colleagues in the administration on, do they view that Pruitt went too far and there needs to be some judiciousness, is that a word, or I just created a word, put back into it?
We are very fortunate to have two great senators, with Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst. And I know you all know about all of the White House meetings where it was basically Grassley and Ernst versus Cruz last year, and they were trying to really figure this out. What Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst have done really well, certainly to the White House, is making this known and making this clear and making this and having them realize what a mistake Pruitt's Halloween candy was to everything. And so I think with their leadership having shown that, having specifically talked to the president and the leaders at the White House about it, I don't see that Halloween candy happening again. But we still need to make it. We still need to elevate we need to keep it elevated so that they know and they understand and they realize. Unfortunately, Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst are great deliverers of that message with a White House that appreciates both of them and what they have to say. And I like to use this. I think they trump Cruz.
Kevin, Pruitt and even Wheeler in his recent testimony has kind of said, well, look, we lost a couple court cases, and then there's this appropriations report language, so we just kind of have to grant these things. It's not necessarily true as I would see it, but with the Democrats having taken over control of the House from a fairly oil-friendly leadership that was there previously, do you think there's a chance to maybe through approach or other measures, not necessarily full-blown legislation, but like approach language or something, do you think there's any chance to use Congress to send a reverse signal to the EPA, or is it just too gridlocked?
First, I'd like to comment, though, on Mr. Pruitt and Mr. Wheeler. You said the difference there. Mr. Pruitt was a creature of Oklahoma politics, and I know had an interest in wanting to be the governor of the great state of Oklahoma. I think that when you look at Mr. Wheeler, he's a creature of Washington, and he understands that he needs to survive in that community after the fact. So I think that he's going to be much more level-headed when it comes to these small refinery waivers and so forth.
That's a good point. I mean, we don't know what he's going to do on
right.
small refinery exemptions, but you almost had the feeling Pruitt woke up every day and said, gee, what can I do to destroy biofuels today?
Yeah.
And Mr. Wheeler certainly does not wake up with that on his mind.
Yes,
So
and I also think everybody in this room needs to give themselves a pat on the back, and everybody that was involved in communicating, and I'm not just trying to give a shout out to Iowa Corn, but everyone in this room that worked behind
It's
the
okay
scenes.
if you don't, you'd probably be in trouble.
That's right, Monte. But getting Secretary Perdue, we cannot forget about how important USDA has been, and I know I'm biased, I was there 11 years, of how important USDA and working with us on getting the White House to realize on turning Mr. Pruitt and the administration on the demand destruction that was going on at the EPA. And when Secretary Perdue changed that narrative in a Senate hearing and said demand destruction, that was the game changer, I think, was when all of us were here were like, we're going to get there. So I just wanted to point that out, that Secretary Perdue is a huge integral part of this puzzle, and we also need to make sure that we keep pressure on that. And I said earlier that maybe Andrew Wheeler was kind of wanting to get this behind him. I think also Secretary Perdue would like to move on from this also.
We'd like to move on as long as it's on
Yeah.
a good path.
That's right.
You know, but you brought up a question. Let me just ask Eric real quick, and then I'm going to switch topics. Sometimes sitting out here in the cheap seats, it felt like, and not talking about our elected champions like the governor and our senators, but inside White House staff. We felt like if they were having a staff meeting, Secretary Perdue or whoever was there from USDA was probably the only person in the room when you added in EPA and White House that was for us. Now, you know, sometimes I feel like in the entire White House structure, the only friend I have on this issue is President Trump himself. I don't know who to pick up the phone to at the economic advisors or the environmental quality folks. You know, I used to know some people, and the one person we knew went to USDA.
Ray.
Are there, yeah, Ray Starr. Are there other people in the White House that I just need to like get a hold of that, or is it almost feels like it's like the White House staff versus the president on this sometimes? Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'm out here, but what did your view show you?
You know, when I was there, you're absolutely spot on. Okay, I mean, but fortunately, so when I was there, I remember Ray Starling and I sitting in meetings, and this is when Pruitt was there. It was everybody against us. It was the EPA, NEC, everybody. They were making recommendations that we were not recommending, and we were the only ones fighting. Fortunately, I remember this happening. The president called Pruitt and said, "This is the policy." And that was also thanks to leadership, like I said, from, namely from Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley, that really elevated this and directly to the president. So we've got to continue working with and letting this White House staff really know the truth and let them know our side. I think we both know folks that come from New York and East Coast and Oklahoma and other states that don't realize or certainly have listened to API or oil side of things. They don't come into it with the same feeling that we do. Fortunately, we have a president that does. Fortunately, we've got all the leaders in this room and our leadership with Senator Grassley and Ernst that have made things happen, and we're in a better place because of it. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, like you said, and we need to continue getting to know, working with the White House, showing them the data and the truth that we have.
No, thanks for that insight. Because I want to move on quickly, maybe just a yes or no. Do you see the strong possibility of, so there's people out there that want to put legislation in that would dramatically reform the RFS by ways of destroying it, and we had some of those bills floated around last year. 2019, new leadership in the House. Is anti-RFS legislation likely, I mean, we never know, but is it likely to pass the United States Congress in 2019? Yes or no? No. No? Good, I agree, no. So there's another one, take that home. Now, to legislation we would like to see. I mentioned in my remarks, it's a heck of a way to run a business when your government tells you, please go out and sell your product on the hope that we will retroactively reinstate a tax credit that then will make you financially whole. Of course, if we don't, I don't want to think about that. So Donnell, near the end of last year, there was a big push for a multi-year extension of the biodiesel tax credit. It did not pass, I think, more because of the broader package than the opposition to it. But how do we then, in this dysfunctional town called Washington, D.C., get that over the finish line in 2019? Will we, and how will it happen?
Well, I like to say we will, but there's a lot of work ahead of us, and everybody in this room and beyond is going to be a piece of that. We made a lot of headway last year in being able to talk about why a long-term biodiesel tax credit is a better policy, not just for our industry, but a better tax policy.
Yeah.
So what's out there, what came together late last year was a 7-year tax credit that phased down the amount. So it gives our industry a predictable future. And so, we talk about the dollar and what it means to biodiesel producers, but it's really at the blender level. So the goal is that it incentivizes everybody through the supply chain. So all the way down to, distribution and consumer locations. So when that credit is not there, like it is again this year, we're getting into 19. We don't even have it, for 18 yet. Yeah. So there's a lot of uncertainty that makes it hard to make those investment decisions. Do I add production capacity? Do I, what do we do downstream? How do we get more product when the question is, will there be more product? So that's why we believe it's a much better policy what's out there. And so our job now with this 119th is to pick up where we left off with that conversation. And there's a lot of new members of Congress this year. We hear there's a continuing theme about low carbon fuel, low carbon transportation, and that's exciting for us because that is absolutely our wheelhouse, right? And so it's something that is important for us to make sure that carries through and that we're there to manage that conversation through the end.
You mentioned a lot of new members of Congress that we have to educate that weren't there last year when some of this work was done. But one member of Congress who's been there, I don't know what, 2 or 3 years, Senator Grassley. He's now in the chairman of the powerful Senate Tax Writing Committee, the Senate Finance Committee. Doesn't he just get a magic wand and this all happens? Or what? How does his role change now that he's back on finance chair, as the finance chair?
I wish he had a magic wand, but he definitely has a lot of influence, and he had it before he sat down there. I mean, he's a very distinguished member of the Senate and very well respected across both aisles. So that's positive. But then to have him in a position where he can be influential in the discussions that are going on, I don't think we could be in a better position to see success. But again, it's not going to happen just because Senator Grassley is the chairman of the Finance Committee. So we're all going to be rolling up our sleeves and going to work.
Yeah, the tax bills have to start in the House too.
Right.
Very briefly, when we used to just be that 1-year extender, train every year. It had biodiesel in it, which got most of the attention, but there was also a cellulosic tax credit as well. That was not part of like the 7-year plan. So will we still be seeing a push for, at least on an extenders basis, the cellulosic tax credit, or is that lost steam, or what do you guys think about that?
I mean, we're still involved heavily,
Okay.
and I forget what Ed calls his coalition on this effort, but I mean, we actually have 2 in there. So the cellulosic provision, but also the alternative fuels infrastructure credit. Yeah. And for E85, that's $30,000 or 30% up to $30,000 for every station that adds E85. So it's significant. And of all years to not have it, we had the USDA's biofuels infrastructure partnership program. We had a lot of efforts from prime to pump, and that was a year we didn't have the infrastructure credit. So maybe we didn't need it, but it definitely helped out over the years. So yeah, I mean, we'll remain engaged.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to let people know that is still something that's out there as well, where we need Congress to actually pass a bill, which seems to be something they don't do very often anymore.
And the change in cellulose or cellulosic production is it's coming from the corn plants now.
Yeah.
So it is a bigger issue.
We have a number of people in this audience who are producing corn kernel fiber. Obviously, we have Poet up at Emmitsburg using corn stover. And then one of the things we probably won't have time to get into, but we have a ton of corn kernel fiber pathways sitting at the EPA, been sitting there for a year waiting to get approved. I mean, we could see a lot more cellulosic ethanol production pretty much overnight if they would just approve those. So that is an issue we have to keep our eye on. I do want to talk about the reset. So in the RFS, just brief overview, if the EPA waived the volumes down in 2 consecutive years by a certain amount, it triggers this magic authority for them to rewrite the congressionally mandated schedule for renewable fuels that ran from the beginning of the program through the year 2022. Last year's rule that was finalized in November triggered that authority, so the EPA can rewrite the remaining schedule through 2022. So that'd be obviously these next three years. Yep. I'm doing my math right. I only had to use 3 fingers for that. You know, you talked about having a rule out 4 to 6 weeks after the government reopens. I don't think that's probably going to happen, but what do we expect? You know, give me your 30 seconds. We'll start maybe with Donnell and come this way. Give me your 30 seconds on what you think will be in reset that folks should know out here.
Well, so for, you know, in our situation, biomass-based diesel, as I said earlier, is a shining star in the RFS. And so we've surpassed the volumes that have been set by the RFS every single year. In fact, we petitioned the EPA during the process to even set those volumes higher than they ended up setting them. So we want to continue that conversation about why and how we reach higher volumes through the RFS. And you know, the advanced bucket is another bucket we play in, and that's sort of the big target, I guess, of this whole reset. So another one of those roll up our sleeves and get to work efforts, because I think what Administrator Wheeler and his team come up with here is going to, you know, it's going to be an indication of what we're going to have to deal with in the coming years. Going
forward. Okay, Robert, what's your 30 seconds?
I think the same thing. There's 6 factors they have to look at. I had these 2 hands there. And they have to, you know, the law prescribes how this is done. We've been gearing up for this reset, knowing it's coming for years. We are heavily prepared. We want the corn-based ethanol number to go up above 15 billion gallons. We think it's there. We think the legality is there, and we will build a case to make that happen.
Okay, just so you guys didn't know, hear that, you can go above 15 billion gallons. In the set schedule, that was the max for conventional biofuels, but with the reset being the delta between total renewables and advanced renewables, you could actually see that. Even Scott Pruitt, who wasn't our friend, acknowledged that they could actually set it above 15 billion gallons. But will they? I'm voting no. Not because I want that. I'm just, if you want my honest opinion, we're going to work hard on it. But it is a possibility. And maybe if reallocation comes in, then I would think they would be able to do that. Yeah. Kevin, what's your 30 seconds on reset?
I think that they will go above, and here's why. I think EPA, I think the one thing that they feel that they've lost with the people in this room is trust. They never lost it with the oil and gas people, but they've lost it with us. And they need to build the trust back, because that is the last thing that anybody wants. I know, just serving in DC or any of us, is when somebody's lost trust in you. And I think for them to rebuild that back, they've got a long ways to go. I think they want to get it done, and I think they will try to regain our trust back.
Okay.
If
Eric,
they're smart.
I'm going to save you for another question, if that's
Well,
okay. Or go ahead. Go ahead.
I completely agree with that, and I think we're going to see 16 plus.
Okay. Wow.
Vegas is writing the odds as we speak.
Look,
I'm putting all my money on Eric. That would be awesome.
I would go upstairs and put a wager on that.
Farmers don't need casinos to gamble. We farm. So, both in terms of the reset and in terms of the RIN reform part of the year-round E15 that we've heard about, I've heard little rumors, and hopefully they're just people who don't know any better, but that the whole point of obligation thing could re-raise its head, or the whole API 10-year plan to cap us at 9.7% of overall fuel. Do you see the reset, or perhaps even the RIN reform being somewhere where the oil guys try to convince the president, the EPA, to slip in these things, which we have previously defeated head to head, but do you see them making a reappearance?
Yeah. Anyone? I mean, they will continue to throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Again, I mean, while we make our case, they try and dismantle it. So I think we'd be foolish to think it all doesn't come back again. I mean, we've been fighting food versus fuel for 30 years, so or 40 almost now. I mean, these things recycle, and they will continue to try.
It's like a bad horror movie, we stick a stake through its heart, and then 2 weeks later, it's back. Any other thoughts on that? I mean, I tend to
Did you
agree
just
with
say
Rob.
that oil companies have hearts?
No. Well, it's a good point. All right. Moving along, let's see. So I wanted to ask about that. We asked about poo above 15 billion. We've got a few minutes left, and if folks have a question or two, there's some mics in the aisle. There's so many lawsuits. We've got at least 4 for SREs. We've got RVO lawsuits. We've got the remand, the RVP lawsuits to come. And Donnell, I don't know, biodiesel is impacted in the RVO lawsuits, I believe. Is there any one lawsuit that you want to highlight and talk about what you're doing or how important it is to keep an eye on for folks, or does anything come to mind on the lawsuit front? We're going to dig into these a little bit deeper with Adam this afternoon, so come back for that. But while we've got these experts here.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the lawsuits have their unique position to make those arguments that we're looking for and ask the questions that we're being asked about. So, why and what is the methodology for requesting these small refinery exemptions? What's the application of the requirements for receiving a small refinery? Why are we not knowing and learning more about those? And so the whole issue of transparency was kind of what led to a lot of these lawsuits, quite frankly. So we're anxious to see them all play their way through, and I think every single one of them has a great deal of merit and has an opportunity to be a huge difference maker for our industries.
Okay.
Chris has got a question.
Okay, well, you didn't want to talk lawsuits? I'm coming back to you. Go ahead, Chris.
Chris Clayton with DT and the Progressive Farmer. You guys just did a great job of explaining how messed up it can be for this industry to rely on one individual to decide what happens to renewable fuel volumes going forward after 2023 or 2022. So why is it there is no discussion being put forward of a Midwest renewable fuel standard or low carbon fuel standard to protect the market that is already there in the Midwest? And that's my question.
Well, I invited him up here, so I'll take the first stab at it. There is discussion. I've been a part of some discussions. I've not been as in-depth as some others, but I think there are ongoing discussions right now. We're not necessarily enamored with the California model, which puts some penalties on biofuels, which we don't think are justified, but is there a Midwest version of that? Is it low carbon? Is it clean octane? What's it look like? My feeling is those discussions are still fairly early on. But we have other people here who've been involved in them deeper than I. Does anybody else want to jump into that?
I think that sums it up right now.
Okay.
I mean, just so we're clear, this is a broad group that's involved with this development. So stand by for news, I guess. Yeah,
and it is unique because each state has its different culture, it has its different political systems, it has its different leaders that like or dislike. I mean, one of the first things we found was in a lot of Midwest states don't call it a low carbon fuel standard because that sounds like California. The door is shut right there. They don't want to listen. Oh, but ours is different. Too late. Door shut. So some of those discussions are happening, but I don't think right now today anything's ready for prime time.
That's right.
And to show you I'm not scared, the 10th Circuit case is the one that we're honed in on right now, and we're involved with all of them. In the findings, EPA has already admitted to the court that the issue is beyond just CVR and Holly Frontier. If you're looking for a settlement that brings these gallons back to the marketplace, or at least removes them in the RIN market, I guess is perhaps a better way to put it, that's very telling. So we were trying to find our poster children. We looked at CVR and Holly Frontier. If this goes the way it's leaning, it'll be very beneficial to all of us.
Any lawsuit, Kevin, you want to jump in on anything, or just they're all out there?
They're all out there, and like I said earlier, anytime you go into the courthouse, I'm always a little nervous, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Okay. Eric, and then I'm going to ask everybody to maybe give a final thought or a crazy prediction or something that you want people to walk out of here with. Well, you guys are thinking about what that will be. Eric, we don't know yet, but I'm going to assume that President Trump is going to run for re-election. We know our Senator Ernst is on the ballot, so they could inconceivably both be on the ballot here in a couple of years. How does that play into how we should approach and have our strategy for what we're looking for in so many issues? As I said in my remarks this morning, I think 2019 could go down as one of the most impactful years in the history of biofuels, for better or for worse, because so many different lawsuits and reset and RVP and you know, all these different things are out there. How does that play in? And if it does, how should we try to grapple with that?
You know, the best thing that we've done, and we did this together 2 years ago, was really getting out, showing our support, and you know, certainly talking to President Trump. And you know, as what we did is we taught him exactly what this means to the economy, what it means to farmers, what it means to Iowa. All those things that we taught him, he has held on to, and we've seen decisions and we've seen things happen, you know, certainly beneficial to us. You add Senator Ernst to that equation, and that is only that much more helpful, because when they are, you know, likely campaigning together, or our teams are working together as far as you know, what's making the difference for Iowa, how Iowans are succeeding. This is a great example, you know, to work with them on and to show them. So I would say continuing to, you know, talk to them, show our support, show what they've done, how it affects, or, you know, let them know what the good things that they've done and how it's helped us. That will further continue to help us.
You know, Kevin got in a shameless plug for Iowa Corn earlier, so I'm going to do a shameless IRFA plug. 3 years ago, right here, Donald Trump stood, and for you political trivia nuts out there, I'm 100% confident that it was the very first time in his presidential campaign where he spoke from a prepared text. That was not, as you know, his style. But he came here and he wanted to he knew some of these words, RINs, RFS, acronyms. He knew this was complicated, and he wanted to get his message clear and correct. And so he actually did work up with his staff a prepared text. And he said, I will support the congressional schedule of 15 billion gallons in RFS. I will work to remove roadblocks to higher blends. And I sometimes, even with all the challenges we had in 2018, I sometimes shudder to think where we would be if he had not stood here and we had not videotaped those remarks to remind the White House. So at the time, I didn't really think it was that big a deal, full disclosure. I wasn't sure that he would be the nominee, let alone the president. But in hindsight, it's like, man, I'm really glad he read those 4 or 5 paragraphs. But, one more question, and maybe we'll wrap it up with this. Here we go. You can work in your bold prediction.
Quick question here for Eric. With the tariff hassles that are going on, China, U.S., give us an update on how your parents are getting along living in China. I think of them often. You know, didn't they used to live in Boone and were semi-retired? What a contrast in their lifestyle. Just give us an update how your parents are doing.
Well, I've been very fortunate to have been able to go to China 6 times over the last year. So I've certainly seen firsthand. I would say, I mean, just to be honest, a year ago right now, after they had been there for their first 6 months, you know, I think there was still some culture shock. There was still some, you know, getting used to a routine and you know, how things are done. And this was just a completely different, you know, different thing for them. However, you know, a year later, we actually just got back from our, what we called the Branstad Family Asia Christmas Vacation, where we did 2 days in Shanghai and 2 weeks down in Phuket, Thailand. But the difference last year, after they were there 6 months, and this year is completely different. They, you know, my mom has really found leadership roles and new friends, and you know, they found a Catholic church to go to, and all those things that make their lives much more normal. And they truly you know, love the people and love the culture and love their neighborhood, and have got to travel all throughout China. It's like getting to know, as we've all gotten to know the United States, because this is our country and where we've lived and all the great things the U.S. has to offer. China has the same thing, and they've been able to go and travel and do that throughout China. So I think they're actually now they're really having fun. They're really and Dad, as you know, Dad, he's never going to retire.
He doesn't sit still well.
He doesn't sit still well. He's always working. In fact, I always tell this story. When he comes over to my house and we're all watching, football or basketball on TV, he's out in my yard picking up sticks. Because if he's not doing something productive, then he's not doing anything. And so this is a completely new challenge.
Can he come to my house?
Yeah. This is a completely new challenge for him. And he, as you all know, he works only one speed, and that is turbo. And so, he's really getting in there, studying, getting to know everything, what's going on, and he's certainly out there fighting every day for us.
Yeah, when we were over there in September, he's very engaged. We always went to 99 counties here every year. They've got 37 provinces, which are a little further apart than our counties, but he was on his way to doing all 37 provinces. He wanted to make sure he had a visit in. Let's do speed round, and then I've got a few announcements before we break for lunch. Bold prediction or any other take-home message you want the people here to know?
So I'm not big on bold predictions, but I would say one of the common themes today has been our conversation about how important our champions are. Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst are tippy top on that list. So number one, we can't take them for granted. And number two, we need to keep working with them and continue building more champions like that. We need more folks that, in my opinion, will lay down on the tracks for our industry. We've seen that. We've found numerous times that Senator Grassley has come to our aid, whether it's with an Administrator Pruitt who's off on his own, or whether it's with the President to make sure they're reinforcing a message of ours. So please, take your role and responsibility seriously and make sure your representatives and your senators know how important the renewable fuel industry is to you.
I'm glad you said that because I was remiss. I should have asked a question that got Dave Loebsack, Iowa Congressman. In the House, it's really important to be in the majority because if you're in the majority, you kind of get to do stuff, and if you're in the minority, you kind of get to twiddle your thumbs and complain about those in the majority. Well, now Congressman Loebsack is in the majority, and he is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction for the renewable fuel standard. He will be a person who I think will be relying more and more on as one of those champions. Robert.
Again, no big bold predictions, but I will say thank your champions. They are tired, just like you are, of fighting this fight, but we need to continue to do that fight. Mary Giglio would chastise me if I didn't promote the National Ethanol Conference in 2 weeks. I promise a 100-degree swing and wind chill. So hope to see you down there.
Kevin, anything, last words?
I don't like to do bold predictions, but I do think that Iowa will be inundated with presidential candidates coming up in the next...
Very bold.
Very bold.
Yeah, very bold.
And I think it'll be a great time for us to showcase our farmers, our industry, our products, because and everybody knows in this room it's an easy sell, and I think it'd be great.
Eric, any last words?
Well, when you mentioned 4 years ago when we had the president here, what was actually really the best was when was previous, right before that in November, he was doing rallies all over the state, all over the early states in his campaign, and we got him to come to the Poet plant, and that's when he actually really got to see a plant and feel the plant and really understand. I mean, we had been telling him about what we do, but being able to show him
and
the employees and everything else and the technology, that really got to him. So that puts us in the good position we are today. And I'm going to hold my 16. So if it's not 16, you can send me hate mail.
Okay. My bold prediction, I'll make two. We will get a multi-year biodiesel tax credit done in 2019. Might be December, but we'll get it done. And we'll face some new attack. We had that laundry list of attacks we beat from big oil. they're creative people. They're going to come up with, they're going to recycle some old ones. My other bold prediction, I have no idea what it is they're going to come up with a new one that we have to defeat as well, and we will. Thank you again to the panel. Can we give them a round of applause, please? And be back at 1 p.m. sharp for our trade panel from Beijing to Baja. We've got some real experts here. And I will tell you, if you want a boost for biofuels, particularly on the ethanol side, and farm prices, in the short term, it's going to be trade. So you want to definitely be here at 1 o'clock for that. And then we're going to break for lunch now. Lunch is on your own. You got what you paid for, and it was free registration. So they do have a buffet, a cafe, some other options. If you really are crazy, want to go outside, there's some fast food places across the street if your car starts. So we will see you back here at 1 o'clock. For trade. Oh, and if you have a chance on the way out or way in, stop by the IRFA booth and sign the letter to Scott Pruitt that says, get the E15 rule done and stop granting these darn small refinery exemptions. With that,
Andy Wheeler.
What did I say, Pruitt?
Yeah.
Former. I love saying former so much. I work it in. Sorry, Andy Wheeler, the acting administrator for EPA. So with that, thanks for being here this morning. We look forward to seeing you back here at 1 o'clock sharp for our trade discussion.